The internet is a great resource for us to do research, but there are some skills that we can use to become better at using it as a resource. Today we're going to research the 1967 Detroit riots for an example project using a few different methods of information gathering. We'll look at better ways to use Google, effective ways to use Wikipedia as a resource, and how to identify the validity and bias of sources. Everybody uses Google all the time, but are you using Google to its full potential? So if we search Detroit riots 1967, you see that some of the other suggested searches talk about a map or some footage of the summer of '67 or even some related riots. Those can be useful later after we have a baseline understanding of our topic at hand. So those are definitely some things to maybe consider returning to. So we can see that we have over 300,000 results. How do we find the ones that will be most useful to us? The first thing you want to do is look at the first page of results. Here you can see that each search item is related to the Detroit riots, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's random or unrelated on here. For example, we can click on the history.com link, and it seems to have a nice and brief overview. That could definitely be a good source. What if you need a peer-reviewed source for your research? Well, then you can use something called Google Scholar. So if we type Detroit in quotations and 1967 in quotations, we want Google to search for both of these words in each source and connect them. But, as you can see in the results, we have a family set method for estimating heredity and stress, not what we're looking for. It has the word Detroit, and it has the year 1967, but it has nothing to do with our riots. So Google Scholar will be very specific with your search term. So if we add the word riots into the quotations, here we go. The first thing, who riots? A study of participation in the 1967 riots. That's a citation. So you can actually click through to the link, but you can see that it was cited by 41 people through Google Scholar. So if you want to look through some of these, the ones that have more citations have been used more often and might be a useful source to start with. Now, what's the deal with Wikipedia? As you can see, it was the first result that showed up when we searched for the Detroit riots of 1967. But is it actually a good resource? We see at the top that this article still needs additional citations for verification. So that's the thing to keep in mind as we read through the rest of it. We can see it's a good resource for us personally to understand what happened. There's lots of overviews, but we have to understand that Wikipedia is not the most credible source because anyone can contribute to it. So if we look at Alphonso Smith, who was one of the men who died in the riot, you see next to other sources, there's a box that says who. It says the material near this tag possibly uses too vague attribution or weasel words. So we can think though, like, why might not this source be the best one? But one benefit is if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the Wikipedia page, you can use the list of references to add to your search. Usually these are all reputable sources, which we will talk about next when we start talking about source validity. So how do we know which sources we can use in our project? When we're looking for good sources, we want to focus on a few things. That they are fact-checked, that they are peer-reviewed, they're from reputable sources, so .org, .gov websites are usually a good resource, and so are major media outlets. So if we go back to our search, we see one of the first options is the New York Times article. So it's a major media source, it's going to be reputable, but if we look at the date, it's July 23rd, 1997. So we want to think about what that means. So the riots happened in 1967, so it's still fairly far after the riots occurred. But it's something to consider. We might want to look at historical sources that come right from 1967, so perhaps a New York Times article from that year. We might want to look at this one, which happened in 97. We might want to look again now to see if there's any current or updated research on these riots that would be better for us to pay attention to. Now, the New York Times is usually considered kind of a liberal media outlet, so we want to identify some bias in our sources that might exist. So look at this result for Detroit Race Riot 1967 from blackpast.org. It's a .org, so it's likely to be reputable, and we can hear it's an online reference guide to African American history. But we want to keep in mind again, it's blackpast.org, so it's probably going to be a little bit biased in its presentation of information. So we've talked about some Google tricks to become better at searching, understanding Wikipedia's strengths and weaknesses, and learning how to assess validity and bias in sources to find good sources for our project. Happy searching!